Hi, I'm Sleep Aid, your local sleep paralysis demon, and today we are taking a look at Trinity Saga, a webtoon by Melonparfait. And as a reminder, if you would like me to review your webtoon, you can submit it to this Reddit post, which is linked in the description. So, Trinity Saga is a sci-fi drama comic. I'll go ahead and read the description, and then we will discuss it. It says, in a time of global unrest, information broker Lucille Fortune finds herself captured by the Vladic Empire, a nation determined to bring the world under its rule. Her captor? Ignis, a mysterious man operating under orders by Calyx, the Empire's second in command. To escape, Lucy must forge new bonds, reconcile with her past, and learn the truth behind the very man who captured her. Okay. And so, as you can see with this comic, there are a lot of episodes. There's 169 total uploads. Some of them are intermissions, but overwhelmingly it is mostly actual episodes. But the thing that you'll notice very quickly is that each episode is only a couple of pages, and so they are cut for vertical scroll, which is good, but they do tend to be very short, and I think it's definitely good to upload in whatever capacity allows you to upload consistently. This has been a very consistently uploaded comic ever since it started. I think it's been every week, and even some weeks when there's no actual pages getting uploaded, there's some kind of intermission or some kind of episode in general, like whether it's a bonus or Q&A type things. And so it's very good to maintain consistency with a project like this. It definitely helps to keep it on people's minds, although I do feel that at times the episodes are a little bit short, since sometimes you'll only get 1 page or 1.5 pages, and so it'll just be a few panels of characters having a very, very short dialogue exchange. And so that was something that stood out to me a lot with this, is that while I do think the consistent uploads are very, very good, it can at times be hard to read all in one go, because the flow is constantly being broken by having to switch episodes every few panels. And so you'll kind of see what I mean by that as we start reading it, but that's just a minor formatting complaint. And I think the trade-off of having consistent uploads does kind of make it worth it. But it does, again, just make it a little bit harder to binge read it, since you're constantly having to click through to new episodes. And so, anyways, about the content of the comic itself, I thought the art was overall decent. Does a pretty good job of showing what was going on. I didn't really have any trouble with the visuals of the comic. I think the characters are generally very recognizable. They all have pretty distinct color schemes and silhouettes that make them stand out apart from each other. And probably the thing that I enjoyed the most while reading this were just the different personalities of the characters as they interact, and the kind of fun scenarios between them all. But it's definitely a comic that is carried by the interesting cast of characters, and the overall narrative, the actual story itself, is a little bit hit or miss, in my opinion, because it feels like it kind of takes a long time to really develop. And so the pacing was definitely something that was a bit hard to follow at times. And again, part of that is just because binge reading it, you have to click so many times in between episodes, and so you just get a few panels and then you wait on the next one to load again. And so this is one of the unfortunate parts about the Webtoon platform, is that the way it's designed, they really expect the episodes to be longer, and so it's not really optimized for like good loading times for shorter uploads. As you can see, there's a couple seconds delay for the next page to load up, and then every time I have to scroll past the thank you screen and then click on the next chapter button, and that's not really a big deal. That's, again, a minor complaint. It's just something that really does add up when you're reading so many of these all at once like I was. And so for a more traditional comic hosting site where it, loads the pages very quickly and you can just flip through them without having to scroll up and down, it would be totally fine. But it does feel like that the shortness of the episodes made the pacing feel like it was stretched out even further, because it's hard to get invested in a scene since it's constantly being broken up. And so it hurt the immersion and hurt the reading experience a little bit. And so I would like to see maybe some alternate upload of this, or some separate version where each chapter is merged fully together so that you can scroll it all in one go, because you'll see the titles of these, they're listed as chapter parts, and so essentially they are long episodes that are split into smaller pieces in order to keep the uploads consistent. And so yeah, that was one thing that, again, made the pacing feel even slower, but the pacing is a little bit slow in general. And so the way I felt about the story was that it kind of lacked momentum, and it took a little bit too long to start explaining things, and there are still a lot of things that it feels like we should know more about that we still don't yet, even after so many episodes, after years of uploads and hundreds of individual episodes. And so the world of this comic is not very well fleshed out. It feels very bare bones, some of the world building and the actual concepts that the comic deals with. And so, as was said in the description, the story centers around a group of intel collectors, one of whom gets betrayed by a client and captured and taken to the evil Vladic Empire's prison to be studied. And so the background scenery, the framing of the world, is that the Vladic Empire is trying to expand. They're trying to conquer everything, essentially, and this is inevitably going to cause our main characters to have to deal with them. But we don't really get a lot of details on that conflict. We actually know very little about the outside world, about the state of affairs, about how the war is actually going, about how the war is actually fought, about where any of these locations are. And so it kind of feels like something that's being talked about constantly, but it's only being talked about at such a surface level that we can't really grasp the actual stakes of the conflict, and it almost doesn't feel real. It's just kind of there as an excuse to put the characters in close proximity to each other, but because the scope of the scenarios that this comic deals with is so small, it's always small groups of characters in very, very closed locations. It makes it feel hard to grasp the broader world. It's like, it seems like it should be a really interesting world that we're in, this weird futuristic pseudo-dystopia with a massive worldwide war going on, but we get so little showing of any of that actual conflict. It's really just mentioned a lot in dialogue, but we see very few of the actual effects of it. And so, yeah, it just makes it feel like some of the setting is just there as set dressing, and maybe could be fleshed out a little bit more just to make the world feel a little bit more real. And then one of the central concepts of the series are the Celestites, which are crystals that give people superhuman powers, and that is essentially all we really know about them. The Celestites are explained as having come from the Vladic Empire And we know that, again, they give people magic powers. They're one of the things that the Empire was using to expand so rapidly. They're one of the reasons that they were so militarily strong. But that is essentially all we know about them. We don't really know the origin of them, how it works, where the power comes from. Is it magic? Is it technology? We get very little actual info on that. And so they're kind of just introduced as this plot device that, again, feels like maybe it isn't fully fleshed out. And that's just one example among many of a lot of details involving the setting that left me with a lot of questions. And so I think especially when writing fantasy or science fiction or future or, any complex setting that's very different from our world, it's very important to constantly be asking questions in the writing room or in the writing process. Why are things this way? And the simple question of why will usually lead you to kind of fleshing out that world building and coming up with a little bit more depth to some of the concepts, which can then help you to work that into the story. It can help drive the narrative in interesting ways and in interesting places, whereas the way that this story is written, it kind of feels, again, like a lot of the setting is actually just an excuse for the characters to talk to each other. It doesn't feel like it really has a broader narrative consideration. It's just there to get our characters into these situations so that they can play off of each other's personalities. And that stuff mostly is fun, but again, I just felt like I had a lot of lingering questions about the overall setting, the overall story, and how any of this stuff actually works. And another example of that is, so the way the story is portrayed, we're jumping back and forth between two parts of the timeline. There is the present, which is Lucy and Ignis inside the prison facility, and then there's the past, which establishes how the two met and how she ended up in the prison facility. And so it jumps back and forth between those constantly. But the prison section feels kind of underdeveloped and almost like it's lacking in intention. And so at this point, Lucy has been betrayed by Ignis. She doesn't yet know why, but he is in the future timeline. He's in the present timeline. Sorry, he's working with the Vladic Empire, whereas in the past he was working against them. And so she doesn't know why that is at the beginning of the comic. But the way the prison complex operates almost feels a bit naively written, because the characters are shown with a large degree of freedom despite being prisoners of war, possessing supernatural powers, and the only reason that we're given that the Vladic Empire is even keeping them alive at all is because they want to study the powers that they have, even though using Celestite magic is something that, as far as we know, originates from the Vladic Empire, and so surely they must have other test subjects. And so these are the types of questions that I find myself asking whenever I read a story like this, is, okay, why does the Vladic Empire need to test the powers of these few inmates that they've got at this prison? Why do they need that information specifically? Like, how will that benefit them in a way that they couldn't get the information elsewhere, considering that they are the ones that have the origin of the Celestites? Like, surely they've got other ways that they could get this data. There must be some special reason that they need these characters specifically. And we don't really get much of an answer to that. The implication later is that the Empire wants to convert these prisoners into soldiers to help expand and, further the war effort. But then again, the follow-up question would be, well, why do they need these 3 people with their powers when surely they have far more people that they can use that are actual willing soldiers that aren't prisoners of war who would have to be converted? Wouldn't it be a lot harder to get these people to do what they want versus just recruiting others from within the Vladic Empire. And so there are a lot of just little questions like that that never really get answered or addressed that kind of make, again, the prison section just feel a little bit naive. And so there's also, again, a great deal of freedom given to the characters inside the prison. They're roaming free among a dining hall, among a recreation center, and they're just allowed to walk around unrestrained despite having supernatural powers. And we even see an attempted breakout as the characters are standing by a door that happens to be under maintenance, and so it's opened, and it's just little things like that that make the world feel less believable, because in this situation where the Empire is waging a war, they're trying to take over the world, we have our characters locked up in a prison that they really don't even need to be in, since it doesn't seem like the Empire would actually need to study the powers that these three have. It doesn't seem like they would stand to gain much from it, especially not on a level to where the second in command of the entire Empire is so closely tied to it. And so it just begs the question of why is this so important to them? But then, again, we've got the characters locked up in this prison, which apparently is very important, because, again, it's handled directly by the second in command of the entire Empire, but the security is so lax that they're able to roam freely, conspire with each other, and there are open exits that are under maintenance in wings that are actively being used, where the prisoners are allowed to simply wander free. And so it reads as though like a little bit of a, I'm trying to think of the way to say this exactly, but it's as though it's what you would imagine prison was like if you didn't really understand it very well and didn't do a lot of research on it. And so the prison almost feels more like a high school, and it just seems that it's kind of lacking in that regard. And so that's the way a lot of the world building in the story is very fast and loose. It's very underdeveloped, it's very surface level, and it feels a little bit hard to get immersed in, a little bit hard to believe. And so that's kind of why I mentioned earlier, like getting back into that method of asking why as much as possible while writing out these scenarios. Well, why are the prisoners allowed into a section that has active maintenance, which is a massive security risk? Why are the prisoners allowed unrestrained while having superpowers that they are even shown to use multiple times against the guards? Why does the Empire actually need to study these three? There's just, again, there's a lot of questions like that, and the more those start to add up, the more questions you end up that are unanswered. Little things like that. These little things, again, like these are largely nitpicks, but when you get enough of them, it's, like I said, it just makes it a little bit harder to get immersed in the setting. And so I think that a little bit more world building here could go a long way to make the story more immersive. And to make the whole thing just a little bit more believable. And to talk more generally about the writing, I do feel like there's kind of a lack of stakes, and the presented conflict is also a little bit underdeveloped, because we know that Lucy, our main character, is attracted to Ignis, the one who betrayed her, and she later finds out, at least starts to find out why he betrayed her, but she even essentially turns down the idea of trying to escape the prison because she doesn't want to leave without Ignis, or at least that's what's implied. But we also kind of see early on that her connection to him is very recent. They met recently, they aren't that close yet, and it feels like her character motivation is a little bit misguided. She seems very attached to the idea of Ignis and very flippant about being in prison. She doesn't seem bothered really by the situation. She instantly complies with everything that the Empire is asking of her. She never questions them at all. She doesn't really fight back at all. It doesn't seem like she has a plan for what she's trying to do here. She's just kind of going along with the situation, but in this case, she essentially should be a rebel in this case. I mean, she's in opposition to the Empire. As far as we know, she's not a fan of them and doesn't approve of their expansionism, but again, as soon as she's captured and imprisoned, she just complies with everything, goes along with everything, doesn't really seem to be plotting any type of move or escape or development at all, and so it's kind of hard to tell like what the stakes of the story are, because we're essentially just watching how the characters interact and get to know each other, and the Empire tests their powers by putting them into these silly little training scenarios that are kind of like video games almost, and it's not even clear what data they're trying to get from this, what they're trying to test, what it is they hope to learn from this, or what they even could learn from this. And it's not clear how this impacts the broader story, which is the ongoing war, and how this ties in with the initial setup for the story, which is the information gathering company that Lucy works for. And then there's the other question of, well, what are those guys doing meanwhile Lucy is trapped in prison? What are they trying to do to find her or maybe get her out? And it just kind of seems like a lot of the important plot details fall by the wayside in favor of putting our characters into cute and funny little scenarios. And those are very fun. And so it is a fun comic to read. It just, again, as I said earlier, feels like the story doesn't have a lot of momentum. It kind of meanders a lot, and it doesn't really seem like it knows where it's going. And I think that's probably the easiest way to sum it up. And so I don't want to sound too harsh on this, because, again, the structuring of the narrative is something that really did stand out to me a lot, and so I have a lot to say about it, but don't mistake that for me not enjoying it. I did actually enjoy reading it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Like I said, the most fun parts of this are just the characters, the personalities, and the interactions that they have. And so it is definitely worth reading for that, even though it has a lot of uploads. Like I said, they're relatively short. It took me a little more than an hour to get through all of them, and so it's not a very long read, and it's a good fun time, and it uploads very consistently as well, and so that's always something that I like to see in these, because that consistency is really what gets people coming back, and it's very, very important in webcomics or any form of web media, really, to have some form of consistency so that people can kind of know when to expect it and know what they're going to get. And so it's almost, I would almost compare it to kind of like a Saturday morning cartoon or something. The overall atmosphere of this comic, it's kind of lighthearted despite having some heavy subject matter, but it's relatively lighthearted, and every week you get your little snippet of this adventure, and you get to spend time with these fun characters. And I think overall it was very fun, but narratively flawed. I think that the narrative, again, really suffers from pacing problems, and I think that the world building is kind of lacking in depth. The story is kind of lacking in direction a little bit, but it is still a very fun read. Anyways, I think that's all that I had to say on this one. I think I would recommend it. And I suppose that's all. So, I will see you in your nightmares.